Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. On behalf of Interweave Consulting, welcome each one of you to Thought Leadership Series. Today's topic is establishing effective ERGs. The session will focus on establishing ERGs at the workplace and its importance in developing a sense of belonging of diverse groups, access to organizational support, decision makers, and community building. Our speakers for today are Anubhuti Banerjee. She's the Senior Manager Transformation HRM at Tata Steel Limited and a founder of a very successful ERG group called Wings at Tata Steel. Next, we have Shweta Verma. She's a Managing Director at PwC and a DI head for India and APAC region. Pothin Jacob, who's partner and senior consultant at Interweave Consulting, and our moderator, Smita, who's the DI head at Interweave Consulting. Interweave Consulting is also hosting a DEI conference in Bangalore on 2nd and 3rd of February, the theme being towards a fluid future. So for more details and registration, would request you to log on to www.inclusionnow.in. I will also share this link in the chat box. Before we actually begin and get into the session, but a couple of quick pointers for everyone. CC caption is available on all the platforms, so please do use them as needed. Please type your questions in the comment box and we will take it up in the Q&A section. And now, without further delay, I would request Pothin to share his thoughts. Welcome, Pothin, Anubhuti.
Good afternoon, everyone. All right. Let me first welcome all of you to this session. And what I'm going to do is quickly going to introduce what is an ERG and also talk a bit about how an ERG complements the role of DI Council and what makes an ERG effective and what are the dimensions and what are the different aspects we need to look at. First, let me give a brief introduction to what's an ERG. ERG is a networking or an affinity group or a community of people with some shared identity or background. Now, these identities or characteristics could come from the different interests that they have, or the life experiences or situations that they might be going through. At the same time, an ERG in an organizational context will also have the sponsorship of the organization as well. Now, if you were to look at the ERG, there are different types of ERGs. On one end of the spectrum, we have affinity groups. On the other end, we have business resource groups. I mean, let me first define what these two are before we get into what an employee resource group is. Affinity groups primarily focus on networking and building awareness about the different aspects and characteristics or the awareness that we need to have as a community with a particular identity or a characteristic. Whereas the business resource groups focus on specific outcomes that a particular organization would want to achieve. For example, a group of people who want to build a particular skill, or a community of people addressing a particular or specific kind of customer solution that they're focusing on. Now, contrasting with these two, the employee resource group focuses on employees and the development and furthering the representation of employees within an organization. So let's understand these aspects of what an employee resource group would deliver in terms of objectives. First one is developing a community. I mean, trying to understand the different concerns, giving a voice to that community, and also helping them to further as a community, that as a collective group of people. The second one is representation. How do we actually increase the representation, working with the internal and the external partners to further the representation of that particular community within the organization? And thirdly, helping the community to, or the members of the community to further their career opportunity, the career growth within the organization. So these are typical objectives that an employer resource group uh, would define as their strategic objectives, or what they want to achieve as a result of an existence of a ERG group. Now, moving on to how does this exist along with the DEI council. Now, the first question that we would ask is, there is already a DEI council. Why should I have an employee resource group? both these uh, Both these serve different objectives within the organization. A DI council addresses the broad diversity, equity, and inclusion requirements or objectives of the organization across different identities and communities within the organization. So it's not really specific to one particular identity or a community. It's much more broader, it's more strategic. It sets a direction what the organization should do over the short and the long term of the existence, or of the focus that they need to provide. Whereas an employer resource group specifically focuses on the specific or unique needs of the identity that it represents. Now, let me take an example here. I mean, let's for the moment assume that we are developing a flexible work policy. The DI Council will focus on making sure that it addresses the needs of all the identities and different communities that they want to focus within the organization. While the employer resource group specifically looks at the unique needs of how that particular community or people with that particular need or unique need that the community would want to have from that particular policy. So uh, when designing that policy, they give specific inputs how the flexible working should address the unique needs of the identity that they represent. Now, moving from the design phase to a development or deployment of the policy, uh, the ERG will support the Diversity DI Council in helping to make sure that the objectives of the policy and how it addresses the different needs of the community is communicated within the group, and making sure that the acceptance of the policy is made acceptance of the policy is broad based in the community as well. And lastly, when it comes to once it's deployed, it also gets into looking at how the policy is utilized and what are the ways by which the effectiveness of the policy can be improved, and feed this back to the larger DI council to make changes which makes the policies more effective. That's an example of how a DI council and the ERG works together and complements each other in the organizational context. Now, moving to what are the different aspects of an ERG which makes it effective within an organization. Now, first, let's talk about the clarity of purpose. Now, the question that we need to ask is, why should this ERG exist? What's the identity that it's going to address? What's the characteristics of that group of people that we're going to specifically focus on? And articulating the impact that's required, that's expected of this ERG in the context of the organization. Now, once we establish this purpose, it's important that we socialize it across the organization. Socialize it to make sure that we get the right kind of management support that we need, and also galvanizing the support required across the community or within the community, and people who are allies to the community, or allies that we need to actually look at people who have common interests but not part of the community, and at the same time the larger group of employees as well. So that's the first step, making sure that we are clarifying the purpose, making sure it's impactful, and lastly, we're having the right support that we need from the management and from the larger group of employees that we're going to address. The second aspect of making the ERG effective is, um, what should the organization look like, and what are the different roles that we need to have in an ERG? What are the responsibilities that each of these roles will have, and how will it integrate itself to deliver the objectives of the ERG? So that's the first aspect of the structural aspect of defining an ERG. The second aspect is the procedural aspect, or making sure that very clear operating principles and guidelines are laid out for the ERG, so that there is absolute clarity how the organization should operate. And bringing one aspect of which is very important is the financial planning and funding aspect of it. What's the source of fund, how those funds will be utilized, and what's the governance and accountability that the ERG should have, to make sure that there is accountability, as an organization, to deliver what it delivers, both from a financial perspective and from an operational perspective. The third aspect is to define the strategic objectives. I mean, very similar to like the way we've defined the charter for a DI council. It's important to make sure that we set very clear boundaries for the ERG, and make sure that the charter is charter is defined in a way that it clarifies the strategic objectives of the resource group. What I mean by I mean, both in terms of strategic objectives, both in terms of the short term and the long term, and emphasizing it on the short and the long term, because short term is very critical to make sure that we have some early wins, that will help us to make sure that no, there is momentum within the group to take it forward. At the same time, the long term objectives, which helps the ERG to set the directional goals, which can then be broken down to milestones and a roadmap, which helps us to achieve the overall, the longer term or the strategic objectives of the ERG. The third aspect is, as many of us know that no, we've actually, this is an aspect that many of us don't focus on, is to develop the leadership of the ERG itself. I'm not talking about developing the career goals or working on the career goals of the leaders of the ERG. I'm talking about the capability and the competence that's required by the leadership, the ERG leadership, to drive and deliver the objectives of ERGs. So what are the gaps that we have with respect to the leadership team? How do we develop those gaps so that they can be effective leading the community and the objectives that we set as an ERG? And lastly, a process of continuous monitoring, that no, we are moving forward with respect to the direction that we have set. And how do we know that we are making progress? It's a combination of constantly calibrating the milestones that we have defined through the roadmap, and also defining a set of matrices which helps us to understand how effective we are in delivering the objectives. And if there are reasons to recharter or reconfigure our ways of working, we should be able to understand what makes it effective and what is not making the ERG effective, and uh, and redefine or recharter or reconfigure the way in which you're working so that we can be more effective. Now, moving to the last element in terms of, it's very important to make sure that we measure the effectiveness of the ERG, and that the definition of that measurement has to be very clearly laid out, so that no, we know that there is progress being made, and there is acceptance and perceived value that the community derives from the ERG that we set up. Like I said earlier, it could be how effective are we in terms of achieving some of those milestones that we have defined, and also communicating the successes that we are having through the journey that we have, so that the community understands what we are doing, why we are doing, and how we are making the ERG effective. So let me stop here, and then let's move on to the other aspects of how it's been implemented in organizations. as a case study.
Thanks, Potan. I think you got in some really important points on, how can ERG really work together with the council on making real impact on ground, and also the entire concept about measuring ERGs and how ERGs can really evolve from just being support groups to having real impact on ground. So, on that note, most ERGs are currently functioning at grassroots level, addressing very basic, authentic need of support and belonging. How can we really leverage it to show some impact at a policy or a systemic level?
So let me let me help. I mean, it depends on the maturity of the ERG and the maturity of that community within the organization. It may not be completely, I mean, it may not be right to just focus beyond the awareness building. First part is awareness building. How do you build that common glue that we need to develop as a community? Now, when it comes to policies and practices, I would look at what's the intent of the policy, and how it helps the community to leverage that particular policy is the most important part. And that's measured through the utilization of the policy within the community. Is it, there are two types of or two different dimensions that we can look at. One, is the policy targeted specifically for a community, for example LGBTQI? Are there any specific policies that we have put in place, and if that particular community is utilizing that? Or if there is a generic policy or a policy which is more broad based, what are the specific needs of the ERG? Is it helping those communities to utilize that particular policy? And what is the utilization, if at all? If there is an opportunity that we have created by modifying or changing the policy. So that those are the two dimensions I would look at: specific policies, and for general policies that we would define, considering equitable uh, opportunity.
So, something that I've often heard from organizations in their wariness of building ERG is ERG by itself is exclusionary. You're, having a group that is homogeneous in nature, how can you call it as an aid to inclusion? So, these are some of the misconceptions that I've heard. So, are there something very similar, or misconceptions or, understanding of ERGs that are not necessarily right? And how can organizations go ahead and communicate the effectiveness of such ERGs? I'm sure you
I
must
would
have heard that as well, right? I mean, a lot of them say that it is exclusionary by nature.
Yeah. So I would look at the role of communication in a different way. I mean, listen, if why do we have why do we when we focus on equitable practices, it's very important to have accommodations and differentiated approach towards different communities. And it's not that no, a policy which is equitable may have differences and should have differences which accommodates different needs of the ERG. So I do not see any problem in terms of having to focus on a particular community. Now, ERG in particular, in terms of how do I bring out the voice of people who are a minority in a majoritarian context? There is need to focus on the community, focus on that particular group, and that's what ERG does. And we do that in the society as well. I mean, not just in organizations. There are different organizations focusing on bringing out the specific needs of a particular community or people with a particular identity, and giving it and giving the right attention that's required for that minority group in a majoritarian context. And that's what ERG does is in an organizational context as well.
So, how do you really call for participation? Is it voluntarily, or do you have to nominate people? How do you really, form the CRG group? Some quick pointers.
I would rather look at ERG membership being voluntary, but it you cannot leave it to choice. I mean, without having being informed about why the ERG should exist and what's the purpose of the ERG. So it's an informed, I would say, induced choice that you make, not by chance, but by design. So it's voluntary, but voluntary by design, not by chance.
On that note, thank you so much, Potan, for these perspectives that you've shared. Let's hear from Shweta and Anubhuti on case studies specific to their organization. Mitch, can you please bring on Anubhuti, please? Hi, Anubhuti.
Hi, Smita. Hi, Potan. Such a
Hi.
wonderful, yeah, such a wonderful presentation. I mean, I think I was taking notes myself into so many aspects which were covered. I think let me just begin with introducing myself. I am Anubhuti Banerjee. My pronouns are she and hers. As mentioned, I lead workplace transformation, which is future of work at Tata Steel, and also I'm part of the and lead the LGBTQ employee resource group at Tata Steel, which we call Wings, which basically came from the idea of giving wings to people who fly. It comes from my own experience, at least the naming of it, in which at one point of time I felt like, you know, a caterpillar who could turn into a butterfly. And the wings that I gained during that process was something that I wanted to share with, say, the entire organization and perhaps in India, Inc. in general, how we are doing right now. We can begin with the LGBTQ employee resource group presentation.
So, meanwhile, Anubhuti, we have a lot of questions coming up. So, what I will do is I will consolidate these questions and maybe, between the three of you, you can answer this.
Absolutely. Hi. So we named our employee resource group Wings, as you can see. Um, So the first question, which Potan also mentioned, and let me put it to you how this presentation is actually created. This presentation is nothing but bringing together slides which were actually used in pitching the ERG to the higher management, as well as pitching call for participation for the ERG. I wanted to not add my, say, observations through the years into this, which was very much pristine, very much how we were thinking at that point of time. And I'm talking about a timeline of 2016, 2017, around 2017 is when we were trying to get an employee resource group for LGBTQ people. It came from my own personal journey. I wanted to come out at Tata Steel. I wanted to be myself at my workplace. Of course, there's always an option for people to think that, okay, perhaps this is not the workplace that I would be, I would be, maybe I should move to another organization, maybe a more inclusive organization, things like that. But somehow I felt that when I joined Tata Steel and the kind of culture that I worked with and the kind of respect that I had for bringing in new ideas, I felt that, even though it's a 100-year-old company, this gives me a chance to, really bring about a pioneering change in this company. And it wasn't really that, there are many other organizations who are having much better policies or things like that. So it was really a question of, trying to make or build at a place where you are and where you can really contribute. So that is the point where I came in, at this point. And we already had a fledgling, you can say, a diversity and inclusion initiative, like just like Potan mentioned, a diversity and inclusion pillar already existed, and it naturally became the first ally, you can say, for starting something for LGBTQ people. And one of the most important things also was that I wanted to have a space where I could converse. So when I joined Tata Steel, even before coming out, I wanted to know that are there other people who are. I kind of assumed that there are a lot of other people, and I just need to get in touch with them and talk to them and find out what are the policies. But I figured out that that is not the case. So therefore the need really was that, let's have that community, let's have that space where people can come and talk about it. And also, if you understand the LGBTQ community, and especially in the timeline that I'm talking about in 2016, 2017, it is also extremely essential that privacy and the people who were part of this group or contributed to this group it was essential that a lot of their activities should stay private, should not somehow spill over into into their daily activities, shouldn't really go to other people. So that is one of the pillars, you can say, where we started with. So the question here which we asked is that why do we need an employee resource group for LGBTQ people? As you can see, at that point of time we used LGBT plus because the LGBTQ plus had not become as much in vogue in our time. But then, as you can see, the questions were exactly the same, and the observations also were the fact that the idea that having an LGBTQ employee resource group in itself is a huge factor for a lot of people for choosing the organization as well as choosing to stay in the organization, just as I mentioned here in the point here. You can move to the next. So the next question is, of course, the objective of the ERG, and the objective was multifaceted, as you can see mentioned here. One of them, of course, was sorry, can you be here? One of them, of course, was which we articulated here as, can you yeah, one of them was to create a space where people can come out. Now obviously this is not essential, it is not essential for people to be to come to for everyone to come out, but also it is essential for anyone, I would say, to find a space where they can be themselves. And it was essential for me, at least, I would say, to feel completely myself by coming out, especially as a trans person. I guess coming out is almost inevitable, which probably some other parts of the queer community do not have to. So therefore that is one of the definite needs that I did put in, that if you can want to come out, if you want to converse about it, having a safe space would definitely be very, very valuable. Another aspect which really want to highlight, which Potan also highlighted, is that the fact that suggestions and the discussions and conversations which would happen in the employee resource group as a supplement to the DAI council which is already there, these conversations could inform decisions or policy changes that will happen. Now in our case, we don't have an LGBTQ policy because I don't think we need something like that. We have rather small changes which were made in all different policies that we have, in order to make them more inclusive for LGBTQ people and all other kinds of intersections that we have. So therefore the employee resource group in itself, the discussions that happen here, become become an area where you can, without fear, propose changes. You can actually feel free to dream. You can say that, okay, I really wish my workplace had this. Now the workplace, in order to get that dream fulfilled, of course will have to go through a lot of process. But the fact that if we only would rest on the DEI council for making all these changes, these voices will not be heard, and these voices also in isolation do not make as much sense as much as they do with validation in a safe space and employee resource group. Another major factor also was, having the employee resource group there also makes it easier for the management to be able to interact with the minority that we are talking about, with the members of the group that we are talking about, for an employee resource group, for example, in this case LGBTQ people. Because that is also another question that a lot of people have, that okay, what is the thought going behind for these people? What do they want next? What do LGBTQ people, what changes do they want next? And if the thought is in many different places instead of being in a group, it makes it more difficult to take that in. Now of course we don't mean that the LGBTQ employee resource group is the monolith. It's completely possible for queer people to exist outside the employee resource group, never to talk about it. I myself have been approached by a lot of people who did not want to join the group even, but identified as queer. And also, of course, there are a lot of people who did not, who came out and who joined the organization. uh, can we And also another third part is, of course, not just within the company, we also were able to communicate the things that we are doing outside the company, which is the last pillar that I mentioned here, is that communicating outside the company is also essential. The next part is, of course, the structure of the ERG, which again Pothin did allude to. Now structures can of course be variable. I think the one that we started with, and I will also say that this is something that we had changed, but what we started with and what we wanted to have was to have a sponsor and a core group of 4 or 5 people. Ideally, if we could have as many people from the community, there's nothing like it. The reason why I stress on that is that for many cases it becomes the LGBTQ employee resource group also becomes a place where a lot of people who belong to this particular, say, minority, belong to this particular community, will be able to sharpen their own, leadership skills, will have the opportunity of being able to lead something with passion, something that they are interested in, and can bring about all of that passion in here. But of course, that of course is not necessary, and in fact I will go ahead and define how we have our LGBTQ champions and members in the next slide. Also, there is a necessity that, apart from the core group, you have a larger group of volunteers. And volunteers, at least in our experience, how we've seen is volunteers don't necessarily stay for a very long time. It is fact that, it is after all an interest based group, and sometimes people, after contributing for a while, lose interest in contributing. So therefore we've always, but it is not like the organization is getting limited, so we've always found it better to have volunteers who come in and who come and go. And we are also able to, uh, uh, say, update ourselves, update the communication that we send to our volunteers, communication we send to our allies, who would come in and who would, come in, go out as time changes. So now we can move probably to the next one, which is basically how we kind of try to define how an LGBTQ employee resource group member should be. So the fact is that anyone with a passion for supporting the LGBTQ cause and drive a culture of openness and equality within the company. As you can already see, it is a broad definition. It is one which actually defines someone like an ally who wants to, contribute to the diversity and inclusion mission that we have in our organization. And also it is quite important that, in this definition, is that the allies, the people uh, who are part of it, it's necessary for them to be informed, to be vocal, to be proactive, to really, be able to see the changes that are coming tomorrow, and try and work for them, and also involved to actually actively participate. So this is actually the call for participation deck that we sent out across, and wanted to ask people to join, and we definitely found a lot of people joining. Can we move to the next one? The slide. So again, this is the role that every person will play in the ERG. So therefore, it's an opportunity to lead the diversity initiative. There is an open and respectful workplace, as well as it is a developmental way in which people themselves can develop. That is the reason why we also see it not only as a group that, that voices organizations, but also a group where people can feel themselves or take the lead themselves. So that is why we found that this sort of a structure helped us a lot. Can we move to the next one? uh, so this is just giving you an idea of some of the things that we've done. So the launch that we had on 17th of May 2018 was actually before the section 377 judgment had gone down. We had brought together people from the industry, and it was launched by some of the biggest leaders in our organization. And one of the lines that I would like to quote from the launch was that when we were launching it, the leaders who were launching it, they mentioned that, we probably should have done this months, years, perhaps decades ago. But today is the right day and today we are making the right decision. And that is the kind of you can say spirit that we started in. And I remember the day very well. It was a rainy day in Calcutta. The storm started really going all out, and that's what we also kind of spoke about. The storm has started outside, and now the storm has started inside the organization. And from then on, we have tried to go from strength to strength. So this was at a point of time where I was the only out LGBTQ person in the organization, to a point where, although it's not a numbers game, but there we have almost a three-digit number of employees who belong to the community, who are, some of them are out, some of them not out, but also who are always willing to contribute, and things like that. We can move to the next one. Maybe these are just some of the highlights that, how, what did we do in our first few years. Is like we had some things with industry experts. We tried to get panel discussions going along. Next one, please. um, we also started a newsletter quite earlier. The thing that you see here, Mosaic, is basically our D&I council, and Wings is our employee resource group, exactly in the same way that Poten has mentioned. So here, these are basically some of the highlights that we did. Something that we haven't done as well, perhaps, and something which we would want to do quite well, is about measuring our successes, and also how well are we developing leadership through the Wings employee resource group. These are things that I am definitely taking away with. Another major learning that we had through the employee resource group uh, launch, and the years that so you can already imagine 2018 to now 2023. It's almost 5 years. We'll be completing 5 years now. It started with a major, you can say, a major push. There was a lot of energy in 2018, 19. In 19, if you move to the next slide, you'd see that in 19 um, we celebrated 20 years of the first Pride walk that ever happened in India. So until here, we were doing quite, we were going big guns, and we were very strong. However, it was still a very small, say, you can say, effort. It was a few different people doing a lot of communications, and many people just, some of them tuning in. But since we were still in offices, and most of these efforts were localized, so perhaps there was few cities, for example, in Calcutta or in Bombay offices, we were doing quite well. But in certain of our offices, the reach wasn't as much. For example, Jamshedpur has many, many, many people, but the reach was nothing. Like, the percentage reach would be very, very less. So therefore, in a way, something that affected us was the pandemic, because we were talking about having, different wings of wings in all of these places, but suddenly it was not possible anymore. With 2020 coming up, and 21, for both those years, we did go back to the drawing board, and we tried to think, how do we imagine our employee resource group. Because now the need definitely was to be, to be hybrid, to be accessible to everyone, not have events which are in place, but rather have events which are webinars or many people can attend. So then we shifted our focus to primarily running campaigns. And this year, since in 22, or last year I would say, since, say, the restrictions have gone down a little bit, is when you can say, almost relaunched Wings again, in a physical form. And very soon we will be having a lot of physical events that we will be having. We're still doing virtual because I think there's still a coronavirus threat that is looming. But the fact is that it's not essential for us to have these meetings in a physical space. Some of the real wins, I would say, for me, I remember, is that the first time we launched our employee resource group, a person who currently has superannuated, they came to me and they said that, the fact that we are talking about this with this much pride and with this much conviction has really changed my heart. Because some years back, there was someone, in my family, who came out to me and who talked about this, and I was not able to be a good ally to them. I was not able to support them, and perhaps if I knew about all of this, if we had things like this earlier, I would be able to, I would probably have done better. So that is a thought that I would want to leave you with, because initiatives at any point of time, if we can make, they make a lot of difference in the lives of all the people that we that that interface us. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Anubhuti. This is really an inspiring story, and you sure did create a storm both internally and externally. And thank you for bringing in those details on how do you create an ERG from scratch and what sort of participation can you call in for. Interestingly, today I was having a discussion with a friend of mine who's from the community, and he was saying that most organizations have these big successful ERGs and a lot of allies, executive sponsors, etc. But me, what really impacts me is me, my manager, and set of 8 or 9 colleagues around me. And for me, it's important that they understand what I am going through. They understand what I feel, but that is somehow not percolated downwards. It's just there. There's a lot of optics. So how can we really move from being, showcasing successful ERGs to going to very, like grassroots level or basic level of understanding people and feelings? How can you sensitize people or the organizations or employees working with the community to understand them far more?
Yes, this is actually, actually a wonderful question, and something that kind of affects me myself. Even having been part of it, there were occasions when I felt that the efforts that I was doing were in a direction why quite different from what why my day job would be, right? So because and I had to do it because this is something that I'm very passionate about, and the fact that perhaps not all of that gets recognized in my day job was a fear that I had. Organizations also evolve over time, and that is something that I've seen my organization evolve. And one of the major reasons why, say, the first year I was doing this and not really being recognized to a later year, the difference was that the more we were speaking about it and more we were bringing it out and speaking with the top management, at least how I see my company is a very hierarchical company, is where the kind of the views that top management holds, the things that they speak about really percolates down very, very strongly. So therefore, one of the major reasons was our way of creating sensitization was to have a lot of the leaders in there, speaking about it and really making it everyday fair. I remember we have a New Year's say address by the CEO and MD every year, and this year they spoke about the fact of gender identity, and of course a part of prevention of sexual harassment, which is in which encompasses all gender identities. The fact that the CEO and MD is talking about gender identity in his New Year speech was for me, a moment of extreme pride, because perhaps when I was starting, that probably would not have been the case. The other thing that happens is that the organization in itself understands that people now have a lot of interests. I mean, you might have heard of terminologies like moonlighting and things like that, in which we realize that we are part of a larger society. It's not perhaps like in the 20th century, when all all the work that you did was the work in the organization that you're working in. Here you are part of a society. There are a lot of voices, there are a lot of I would say differing voices. So in an organization can only learn to reflect the society outside, not the other way around. Cannot put shackles on the society outside. So I think that has also led to something internally, where we've created a whole structure in which people are able to participate not only in their what is considered their day job, but also in projects which are interesting, and in there, and that actually contributes to their career development, that is contributes to their skill development. So I'm actually part of one of the, so we made wings as part of one of those projects, so that everyone who participates in wings and the skills that they learn by participating here would be reflected in their profiles, and would again be visible within the HR organization that okay, they have participated here, so these are the skills that they've learned, and when they're moving to the next position, they that would have equal cognizance, not just what they might have done earlier. In fact, in a way, it's a leg up. So I think that's perhaps one way we found it makes it wider.
A quick related question to that. See, I feel increasingly there's a lot of romanticizing of allyship. And the focus is on how good an ally we are vis-a-vis how can we support the community. So if you had to, maybe share some thoughts on, quick thoughts on allyship, on how can they really focus on supporting the community and less on, how good an ally they are, what would that be? How would, what does allyship truly mean?
I would say, and I do agree to that sentiment to a certain degree, but also I say that allyship is just like the term it says, is an ally or a friend. The best thing that you would ask for from a friend is that when you are going through a difficult moment, when you find yourself say surrounded by something extremely threatening, you want your friend to stand up and say that this is not okay. We and by the you can say privileges or by the strength that they have as an ally, they can actually stand for you. But also the other part is that when it is a moment of where your voice needs to be heard, I think it is very essential for allies to have that ability to pass the mic on, because there are certain things which people of the community want to say for themselves, want to say by themselves, which is essential for any organization or any person to really fulfill and feel themselves as part of. But the fact is that um, allyship is no longer, and diversity and inclusion is no longer an option, or it's no longer at a stage where we can say okay, I can choose to be an ally to this community, or I can choose not to. But because the fact is that you cannot choose not to. The way organizations are evolving, the way the society is evolving, the way the world is evolving, diversity and inclusion itself is not at all a choice anymore. So the fact that a lot of people are asking for representation, and the more we talk about representation, the more intersections of the identities that we have will start coming out, and those are essentially healthy discussions that we have to have. And that is why allyship needs to learn that identities will evolve, and all of these identities are going to be essential. What allyship really does is to understand, and an ally is really someone who has that foresight of seeing it. I would say what is most essential for an ally is that they are seeing further than a lot of other people in their organization who probably do not identify as allies. So it's
True.
not really as much as it's not really as much that you are doing good to someone, but rather you are doing something good for yourself. You see that you are a person who's able to see further, you are a person who is able to lead the organization further in a direction which is going to come, which is going to make the organization much stronger, much better. If we think of that, like if allies think of that perspective, that okay, I understand that this is a direction that the organization is going to go in, and it is not that I'm doing it for someone else, I'm doing it for myself also, for to know that organization needs people like this, organization needs representation, leadership will come, and of course at some point of time agree, accept that there will be leadership representation from the community, whichever community we are talking about, and that will actually make lives easier, or change it in a direction which we've been working all along. So yes, I would say an ally is a person who can see much further, and should feel really glad about that fact that they can and they should lead from that perspective.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anubhuti, for these. These are great insights. With that, I invite Shweta to share her story on, establishing ERGs at PwC. Hi,
Thank
Shweta.
you. Hi, good evening, everybody. Good afternoon. I think enough has been said and spoken. I don't know whether even what I'm going to share is good. Anyways, I think everything has been covered in terms of content. And also, both the speakers, whether Potan or Anubhuti, have shared such wonderful insights, and they both had a presentation. I don't have a presentation, so I have a most difficult task of keeping the audience engaged. Well, let me first give a short introduction. Very happy to be here, Smita, Interweave. I think this is a wonderful thought leadership series that you have. Uh, and especially for people who want to kind of just grasp capsules about some topics. It's a great interactive forum. Uh, in my organization, I lead the inclusion and diversity agenda for PwC India. Also, kind of go back to, or responsible for setting the office of IND in India itself, in PwC India. And I also drive the agenda for the Asia Pacific and also sit on the global COE and the global leadership team of IND. So let me start the whole conversation. I think there is a lot of insights that have already come, but let me share, coming from a knowledge industry, let me share some research, or if I can say some data point from the very recent research that has just come out. So, we all know that global organizations have publicly declared their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's been a while for now. But how have the commitment, or how have the strategy really translated into execution? Or what is the kind of impact that it is really having on employee experience? To gauge this and assess this, PwC recently launched a global DEI benchmarking survey, and we've just got the results of various cuts, whether the global or the APAC. I do have them, so I would like to share some insights. While the focus of this benchmarking survey had a lot of questions, was to assess the efficacy and the effectiveness of what the strategy was doing, uh, what the various initiatives that the DEI policies or strategy had, and what was their impact, or how they were being perceived or experienced by our employees. One of the aspect was on affinities, groups, or the ERGs that we are speaking about, or the role and their role within the organization. And let me give you some global insights. So this survey covered 6,000 plus corporate respondents, more than 26 plus industries, and more than 59 or 60 countries. And when we look at the global information, while the majority, which is 74% of the global organizations that were surveyed, have affinity groups, they are mostly used to foster networks and execute programs rather than inform decision making and help drive business performance. And when we review this statistics in for the Asia Pacific, because we are all a part of the Asia, when we look at this, of course, the respondent size is 940 plus corporate respondents, 13 plus countries, and 26 plus industries. And when we look at the role of affinity network resource groups, majority of organization within APAC, 84% have affinity group, but they are mostly used to execute programs rather than inform decision making and drive business priorities. And when I look at this, statistics, and when I compare, and when I look inside in PwC, it's very relatable. I think we've leveraged our ERGs, or we have leveraged our affinity groups to bring that community together, to drive conversation, or bring that camaraderie, or provide that allyship that we're speaking about, create advocacy. But have we really, and we've kind of upskilled our people, leveraging the feedback or leveraging our affinity groups. But had it really had an impact on business? I really have to think hard. There are indirect ways that it has affected or impacted or supported the business, but directly, maybe a big question mark. So let me kind of quickly jump into the PwC story of our ERG. And let me start with our caveat. We are, I don't think that PwC is at a stage of maturity as of yet. We think that while we are doing a lot in the IND space, ERGs are something that we are yet on our on a very nascent stages, or we've only taken baby steps in this direction, and we are not as advanced as what we heard from Anubhuti and what Tata Steel is doing. And I'd like to kind of take you all back uh, to 2015 or 16, and when we were just thinking about what does really diversity mean, because at that particular point the whole word of diversity and inclusion in India was very new, and only organizations which were really global, or some of the organizations like Tata's, had already started speaking about the inclusion and diversity agenda. But when we were just thinking about it, it was only about women. It was only about gender. And at that particular point of time, I remember we had launched the Women's Network. And the whole premise of having the Women's Network was to kind of just understand that what are women looking for in terms of support, how do we what is it that we can do to impact their career, how do we ensure that their career objectives are met in PwC, and do they feel supported, empowered. So that was the whole purpose of bringing that or creating that women's network. Very enthusiastic participation. A lot of women felt this was very unique and we were doing a great thing. And across regions, we created leaders to run these women's network. And at that particular point of time, we were not using the word ERG, but it was just a network to help us drive that conversation or think about diversity, or just say that, okay, we are taking baby steps and we are promoting via this the conversations around gender equality, or bringing in gender in leadership or inclusive policies. But slowly and steadily, we did see that the participation in these network meetings were dwindling. And the reason being, when we asked our women colleagues, the reason being because our colleagues, the male colleagues, started saying, you are going for your kitty party. And that's how they were starting. That's how it was perceived. That's how it started to show that women were all meeting together, have a cup of coffee or tea together, just get into a room, have some snacks. It's a some sort of kitty party group that was created in office, and that's what it kind of came to be called. And of course, women were not happy about it. And even though, as much as they liked to participate in these activities or participate in these network meetings, they didn't feel that it was really inclusive. They felt that, and it set us thinking that maybe it was not the right approach. The approach is probably to bring in everybody into the conversation and talk about inclusion, talk about diversity, what our strategy is, and then look at it in a very holistic way. And that's how we do it today. So come to 2021 is the time when we really launched our first ERG, and by the name called Shine. It's the LGBTQ plus focus, which is globally across PwC referred to as Shine, because we really want all our employees coming from different backgrounds, and we value the differences that they bring in to really shine in the workplace, be their real self. And the Shine was launched in February 2021. We launched with a very humble participation of not more than, I think, 12 to 15 people. And slowly and steadily, we did think that it's made progress. The whole idea of launching at that particular point of time, we did contemplate whether it is a group that we want to create only for members, or is it that we create the group with the allies. And it was ideated at that particular point of time, and we thought that because this is a conversation which is yet not very confidently done by everybody, there is still those nuances, cultural aspects that people are not willing to openly address. It's best that we include more and more people, and therefore we said that this is going to be the Shine Ally Network, or Shine Ally Group, which would mean that it has members of the community as well as allies who would like to become voice and be advocates of the agenda that we want to kind of create here. And this was of course, we had 5S approach that we kind of said that we will use for this network. And the first was sponsorship. We were embarking on this journey with not a lot of knowledge, not a lot of, expertise, and therefore we did want, and not we had to create a lot of confidence around this within the organization. And therefore, the first aspect was, as Smita did say, that a lot of organizations do, we did have an executive sponsor, providing that leadership voice, engaging with the Shine members, representing, building that community, bringing them together, ensuring that all the perspectives are respected, and ensuring that whatever is being discussed in that forum is has a seat on the table, and that voice is represented by somebody who has that seat. And therefore there will be actions, there will be tracking, there will be that delivery of the commitment that we have set out for. The second approach was selection. Clearly we had, then there were cases, I would not lie, that where we had seen that when people were being recruited, the recruiters were not educated. We did not have practices that were really, we could be very proud to say that we had inclusive practices. There were people who were rejected because they shared their identity during interviews. And we wanted to build that ecosystem and train our hiring managers, train our recruiters on what makes a bias-free hiring or process. So we did create policies, we did educate our people on to ensure that we increase the representation and advancement of the talent. The third is allyship. I think the last in the last conversation, Anubhuti, Smita, both of them spoke about allyship. So certainly, allyship is not self-designation. It's not activation. It's about somebody who has that power. And I think an ally in an ERG group with allies bring more power. That's what I feel, because you have more and more people to advocate and support more other people. It's also it's standing up in solidarity. It's creating that culture of belonging. It's also that strategy for collective power, collaboration. I think it's a great way to make that change and have more and more change agents in that journey. So that's very critical, and we do have a lot of allies in that group who provide that, who help us have those difficult conversations when it needs to be. Skill enhancement, a great forum to bring in change by saying that how is it that we enhance everybody's knowledge. So we do have an inclusive mindset training, and it's a 10-hour training after which a learner is provided with a badge which they can identify on social media. So everybody gets a badge, and there is content that's developed by the LGBTQ community or allies, but clearly it represents their voice, and it's a great learning for people who are undergoing that training. The last is systemization, because what we want to leverage this, bring in change, because we want to leverage this group to tell us that how do we make our processes more inclusive? What are some of the things that we need to change as systems? How do we handle grievances? What are things that we need to do in terms of policy enhancement? So how do you ensure that, the design, the LGBTQ voice is there in the design and delivery of everything that we do? And also, there are opportunities that are defined and identified for everybody to participate. So that's the approach that we kind of felt that is a 5S approach that we've taken to our network. Today, we have more than 100 members in the group, and it's a great story in itself of the journey that we have had, and also proud to share that while on this, because it's a self-identification process. And as I said, when we as an organization, when we set out to kind of say that we want to launch the Shine network, there wasn't a lot of confidence. There wasn't a lot of pride to say that PwC is a safe space for people who are from the community, or we have a very empowered workplace. But when we look back today, clearly can say that with 100 plus members, and there are only two or three who have self identified on our ERP, people ERP. But within our group, it's a great recognition to say there are many, many more who have come out, shared their story. And, I said that, they are from the community and they feel that this is a safe space where they can do that. They can be their real self. So that itself is very, very, that's a proud feeling. We've made mistakes that, whether uh, what we needed to do in terms of driving the agenda ourselves, because when we set our journey, or when we were launching the Shine network, we really reflected that what is it that we should have in terms of the governance, in terms of agenda. And we said that we are the IND team, and we probably would be the best people to define what the agenda of the meetings should be. And every month we were racking our brains on how do we bring the group together? What is it that we need to do? Sorry. And then we very soon realized that it's not going to work. We're probably doing or going wrong because, one, the whole purpose of the group was to allow members of the community and the allies to have a voice. And are we doing that? Are we achieving that objective? Probably not, because what we are doing is we are coming with our own agenda, and that's what we want to tick. Therefore, we reflected back and we changed the course. Within I think after 4 or 5 months, we said that this is not our group. This is your group. You're going to own. Please pick up the leadership team. Please pick up who are the key drivers of the group, who are the people and you guys will have to run the agenda, define what you want to achieve in these forums. And today we have a very active, not only a group, but we also have like a chat group where there is a lot of buzz, a lot of activities like the way Anubhuti shared, podcasts, speaker sessions, a lot of good stuff in terms of, whether it's coming out stories. So a lot of work that has happened as outcomes of the ERG has been, it's proven that it's good. But clearly, if I were to reflect back and see that what is the real change in our inclusion journey that this group has had, in terms of that providing that comfort within the organization, or providing that ease of conversations, yes, we probably are very proud to say that when an employee joins today, and I was in a conversation in fact last month or so, and it was very heartening to see that 2 of our new joinees said that the first thing that we did was search whether we have an ERG for the community, and we joined the same day that we joined the organization. So clearly we are seen as an organization that values everybody and all that they bring in. And therefore that's some lessons learned today. It is, but does it impact the business in any way? I think we have a long way to cover there. So, and not only Shine, we now have several networks. We also have a next gen forum, which is our ERG, if I can say that, in that space for generations to address, because generation is a key focus for PwC India. And that group is a group of our associates to managers. So our leaders of tomorrow, we bring them in a group and they help us. They be our brainstorming group, our ideation group, or our sounding board to help us analyze, policies. It's been a core group of 30 members, and it's basically by design. It's not a voluntary group. It's something like all other groups are voluntary. This is not a voluntary group, because this is a group that we have created we believe are leaders who have potential, or who we want to kind of groom to be leaders of tomorrow. They contribute to a lot of policy making. They have hard conversations with our leaders to say that these things are not working well. This is not a strategy that resonates well with the people. And they've been instrumental in really suggesting some policies that we have launched last year. Also suggesting to leaders in terms of inclusive behaviors, what are some things that are really not working well. And so that's the second, if I can say, ERG that we have. And we are now in the process of launching our third ERG, which is the Abilities Network. And we do also have a network, a small network for women who are either going on maternity or coming back from maternity to help them, deal with the matters that they think are going to be held, can be dealt with people who've gone through the same experience. So they kind of have different kind of conversations of how do they handle emotions, coming back, anxiety, guilt, and all of those things are discussed and very openly in a very free flow conversation in that group, and that really helps pep each other up, provide that comfort that I've been, somebody's done that and has moved on and been successful. And therefore, there is a lot of learning that comes in from that peer to peer conversations. And again, it's self driven. We don't drive that. We just watch the activity. We just silently moderating the whole conversation. So that's on the PwC story. I think we've done some bit, but there's a long way to go as well.
Thank you, Shweta. You started off by saying, you've taken baby steps, but from what I see in here, it seems like giant leaps have been taken by, the efforts that you've put in. And on that note, a quick question. As a DNI leader, how do you really take a call on which ERGs need to be formed? I could come to you tomorrow and say, I need to form an ERG from, people from south of India. How do you take a call if that is needed or not?
So we rely a lot on data. One. Second, a lot of our work that we do is on the business case that we build is defined by what our people are saying. So, and that comes from our engagement surveys, that comes from, our, as I said, the data that suggests us, and also through a lot of conversations that we have with our people. Because as I said, that when we started our journey in 2015, we thought that, diversity is only gender. Let's start the women's group. And then we slowly realized people were referring to it as kitty party. So clearly at that particular point of time, it didn't make sense. Let me tell you, we are relaunching our women chapters. So we believe today that we are now mature enough to say that we launch the women network once again. So I think it's the data that we leverage, the conversation and the voices that are coming from to us from the floor that help us drive. And also very, very tactically that, in all organization, I can tell you, I mean, maybe not for some, but the IND teams are very small. And it's also practically how much or what are we going to do in a manner that will really have impact. Today we can launch 10 ERGs in one go if we have to just tick the box, but will our people relate to it? Because we have to ensure that we take leaps in, but we also have to move with the time, with the people, and allow them the time, allow them that space, and to take them along in the learning path, and not just arbitrarily do some things. So I think our journey, we're taking baby steps. I believe that, uh, and the key is to take everybody along.
Thank you so much, Shweta. A quick question from the participants. How can ERGs move from, culture building, inclusion, equity to improve business? How can the knowledge of ERG help win or retain business?
Very tricky
Open
question.
to all, yeah, open to all three of you.
See, I just, maybe I can just say one thing. The way I feel the impact of an ERG could be on on the business. You know, if members of the community feel valued, or if the members of any ERG feel included, they feel more included when we find, then the ERG is said to be successful, right? They are motivated, they are included, they feel included with the organization. When you have an organization with employees who feel included and valued, they deliver to their highest potential. And when an organization has employees which are performing to their best and delivering to their potential, the organization will not fail. They will deliver good results, they will have growth. That's my take on the whole inclusion agenda. Forget about the ERG alone, but that's how I feel for the purpose of having an inclusion agenda is to ensure that everybody feels that they are respected and they bring themselves, their whole self in the organization, and then only they perform. So that's what I feel in terms of the impact on the business. But I'm sure Potan and Anubhuti can add.
Maybe I'd like to, yeah, add like very very relevant point by Shweta. And there's also another aspect. The whole reason, like Shweta mentioned, of having inclusion and diversity is to have these diverse thoughts within the organization and have those thoughts and ideas lead the organization. So there are umpteen cases which you can actually make in which having people from diverse backgrounds can actually impact your business. This happens perhaps in two ways. One is, which I believe that, I'm putting the example again of queer people and LGBTQ people, because specifically we were speaking of that, is that quite often there are, you might have heard 2020, 2019, when suddenly the entire world started speaking about privacy in our digital platform. We were not talking about this earlier. We were suddenly 2019, a book came out by Shoshana Zuboff, and every platform started talking about privacy. We had a major shutdown where people left WhatsApp and things like that. All this was happened. But the fact is that I, as a queer person, and many other queer people, right from the advent of internet platforms and the data that they were collecting, and the reason that we did not want this information being a sensitive piece of information out there, made us know that, this sort of information, or information for anyone, we were able to predict the fact that, there will come a time where this will become an essential thing for everyone else. So the fact that a different viewpoint exists and is informed by life experiences, is informed by the kind of people we are, is one of the things that drives businesses. For example, if I say that Apple, being led by an LGBTQ person, did much better in privacy versus perhaps some of the other competitors, where that voice probably wasn't there from that long earlier. Another thing that it does is that having people, having representation, also helps you avoid mistakes which might be, because that we are in an age where every aspect of the things that organizations do also are scrutinized, and every kind of communication that they do, every kind of content that they create will be scrutinized. To have people of the community, of whichever kind of community which we are talking about, whether it is diversity in race, gender, sexuality, to have people within the organization quite often makes it possible that to have guardrails against making mistakes. I would say that perhaps I have asked my own company to correct or modify a piece of communication that they've sent across, because I felt that that might not have been the best way it could resonate with the community or something like that. So I think these are definite strong business reasons for us to recognize that diversity is essential. Employee resource group are, of course, to you can say, enable that. At least my viewpoints on this.
I'll respond to this in three parts. The first one, what Shweta was talking about, and both Anubhuti and Shweta, both of you talking, the indirect benefit to the business. The indirect benefit which comes through by making sure that we have an equitable and inclusive organization. And value, or the brand value, the employment brand value that it could have. And also looking at benefits of retention, development, diversity of thought, thinking, everything. I also know of organizations that has leveraged ERG in their business, direct business contribution as well. For example, I know of an organization which has looked at how the products will be accepted by different people from different identities in their marketing and innovation part, and also looking at how the marketing language and messages will resonate with different communities. So there is a way by which we can actually help translate the contribution of ERGs into direct business outcomes. But the larger question, the third part, is that do we need to always justify by making a direct connection with uh, business outcomes in everything that we do? Then what's the difference between an employee resource group and a business resource group? So it's a fine balance that we need to play. Everything need not have to have a direct contribution in terms of business outcome. Some of them are social outcomes that we need to work for alongside the business outcome that it may bring as well.
Thank you so much, Potan, Shweta, and Anubhuti. I'm sure there's a lot of learnings and reflections for organizations embarking on this journey to take back. With that, we come to the end of the session. And thank you, audience. Have a good day. Happy Makar Shankranti, Pongal, Bihu for all of them celebrating. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks a
Bye bye.
lot. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks all.
Thank you.